Yo guys, and welcome back to a brand new video. This is part 2 of What If Andrew's Spider-Man was in the MCU. If you guys haven't seen part 1 yet, I suggest you go watch it. A link will be in the description down below where you can go watch that video first. Also, if you haven't already, go watch my Amazing Spider-Man continuation series, which discusses what would have happened if the Amazing Spider-Man continued past the second film in its own universe. I'll also leave a link down in the description to the start of that series with the rewrite of the Amazing Spider-Man 2. With that being said, this video will discuss what would have happened in The Amazing Spider-Man 3 if it would have taken place within the MCU, under the control of Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige after the Civil War storyline. And then I will go on to explain how he'd tie into Infinity War and Endgame, etc. Civil War has just ended and Cap and Tony have gone their separate ways after the reveal that Bucky killed Tony's parents. Tony carries on as normal and Cap goes to Wakanda with T'Challa, and Spider-Man is left out in New York. This is when we lead straight into The Amazing Spider-Man 3, which will be released in 2017, just like when Spider-Man Homecoming was released in the real MCU. Civil War did deal with some of the ramifications of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 in that we had a scene where Cap and Peter discussed Gwen's death. However, this film will expand on this idea and explain Peter's character development more. Now, I must specify that this series of videos is not connected to my Amazing Spider-Man continuation that I already have done on this channel. This will explore what if TASM 3 happened inside of the MCU, and with that being said, let's get straight into it. This film will very much follow the vibe of the previous Amazing Spider-Man films, however the MCU edition will very much be present to this film as Marvel now oversees this film. The movie will start with Peter and him reacting to the events of Captain America Civil War. Obviously, now that he is in the MCU and he's helped Team Cap, he's currently a fugitive and is on the run. Peter will be dragged down by this, and his arc in this film will be to fight for the right thing, even if it means no one else agrees with him, which was set perfectly from Civil War. This will be metaphorically expressed through the film's opening when Spider-Man will go out to stop a crime, and he will be booed on the street. He will stop the thugs, but people will be scared of him. It turns out that the reason the hate is so strong is because none other than J. Jonah Jameson is forwarding the hate train on Spider-Man after the Civil War incident. He is praising Team Iron Man for siding with the government, but is hating on Team Cap, who are now criminals. This is where the hate for Spider-Man will come when JJ is concerned. The reason that he thinks he is a menace in this universe is because of Civil War, which makes perfect sense as the public only see the surface level details in which the public were exposed to the fact that Team Cap were criminals and should be arrested. Due to this, the police show up at the scene when Spider-Man stops some thugs. Spider-Man escapes and returns to Aunt May. We then have a scene where Peter and Aunt May catch up with each other and they talk about Gwen's death, and this is a really emotional scene. We will then get introduced to the main villain of the film, which is Kraven. He gets a call from his half-brother, whose name is Dimitri, and he tells him that they have a job offer in New York. There is a handsome reward for killing the current fugitive, known as Spider-Man. Now, Dimitri will be like the second villain kind of, but won't play as big as a role as Kraven here. He'll be more in the background, while Kraven will be more forefront. Kraven works as a perfect antagonist as Spider-Man is currently hated by the public, giving the city someone to root for. There will also be a scene explaining what Kraven does and that he hunts animals for a living in Africa. We will also be introduced to Kraven's wife, Calypso, as this then raises the stakes for Kraven's character. We then cut back to Peter as Aunt May says that Anna Watson is back in town and that her niece is with her, Mary Jane Watson. Now, MJ was originally meant to be in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but was actually cut from that film because there were way too many characters, and she was instead going to be introduced in The Amazing Spider-Man 3, so that's what we're doing here. So that's where the MCU will also take this by introducing MJ, and it gives us a chance to reintroduce their own love interest and really establish that this is a franchise that is now being taken in a different direction, and these films are now connected to the MCU, are now overseen by Marvel Studios. It's almost a rebirth of the Spider-Man franchise. Peter is introduced to MJ in a very awkward scene that almost showing the campiness nature and unconfident nature of Peter at this point. After Gwen's death, Peter has regressed as a character, so this makes sense, and over the next couple of films, solo or not, it's all about building up his confidence again to how he was in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. He has to reconnect and win the trust of the city back after Civil War, but also has to reconnect with the confidence within himself. This also acts as a soft reboot for the character, as Marvel have now regressed him and can build him back up and better. This time, Andrew's Spider-Man will still be the same character, but this scene will explore more of a comic book side of Peter's character, almost acting on what Marvel originally did with Tom Holland, but it's still Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. The movie will continue with these sorts of scenes and Peter becoming self-aware of the problem at hand. he decides that he needs to prove himself to the public, and he needs to win the trust of everyone back. This will result in a compilation of scenes where Peter goes around trying too hard as Spider-Man and ends up messing up multiple times. This will knock his confidence on both sides of the character. Peter will be in the dumps because of this, that he is always messing up. He will be with Mary Jane, and MJ will notice that something is up with Peter. Peter will open up to her, but not fully, and he won't admit that he is Spider-Man, but will word it in a way that makes his identity not obvious. This will allow MJ and Peter to connect emotionally and really give these two a believable relationship. Then one day when Spider-Man is out on a swing, Kraven will attack him. Kraven and Spider-Man will fight and brawl. Spider-Man will start questioning where he even came from and who even is he? And Kraven will state that he's here to kill and eliminate Spider-Man from this world. In the fight, Kraven and Spider-Man cause a lot of property damage, showing the jumpy and unconfident nature of Peter's regressed character. However, Peter still manages to barely beat Kraven. Authorities arrive with special force, and Peter begs them to hear him out and that Peter was simply just using self-defense against Kraven, but they're having none of it as they still try and take him down, and Spider-Man escapes. We then have a scene where Peter remembers George Stacy and that he would never want this. Maybe if George Stacy was still here, he could convince the authorities to stand down and be a bigger role in this Registration Act business. Spider-Man remembers, and this is a cool little callback to the Amazing Spider-Man 1 here as well. We then have a scene with none other than General Thunderbolt Ross and Tony Stark. Ross says to Stark that this Spider-Man guy who helped Cap is still out there and is causing a lot of havoc. Tony agrees and says that he knows him. Tony says that he's a good kid, but then Ross says that they have to bring him in for the safety of the public and the laws because of the Registration Act. Tony agrees, so they both agree to bring him in the next time he shows his face. Now remember, you might be wondering, but doesn't Tony already know who he is? Well, no. Captain America Steve Rogers is the only one who knows who Spider-Man is. You see, with Andrew as a more mature Peter Parker in Civil War, that will allow that film to revolve around identity a bit more, thus elevating the stakes for heroes like Spider-Man who have an identity. Peter, as explained in the Gwen Stacy grave scene in Civil War, will not reveal his identity. The only reason Cap will know his identity is because he knew some old SHIELD ops who were brought in by Nick Fury to do research on superheroes and superpowered beings. Cap dug a little deeper and found it was Peter Parker. Tony Stark and General Ross will not have this information as Peter keeps his identity very close to him. However, it isn't over yet as Dimitri is determined to kill Spider-Man for that paycheck. He has set charges inside of a building, and his plan is to lead Spider-Man into that building by using civilian hostages and then blowing it all to smithereens. But he needs him distracted. He needs the suspicions to be away from him. So he decides with his tech to break Kraven out of jail to help take down Spider-Man. Kraven is pissed. Kraven isn't just mad that he was put away, but Spider-Man has ruined his dignity. No prey has ever beaten Sergei Kravinoff. He wants his revenge. He has his scent from their last battle. It's personal to Kraven now, and the hunt is on. We then get a scene with Peter and MJ. They are out walking down the street and they ask each other how they are, and they're really hitting it off. They're really good friends at this point in the story. All the Spider-Man stuff is getting to Peter and he really needs someone to tell. He wants to tell MJ, but he can't because he knows the consequences of revealing his identity. Then none other than Kraven track him down again, but this time as Peter Parker. Kraven exclaims that he knows he is Spider-Man and mocks him and MJ. This is a public place, so Peter has to get her out of here. MJ doesn't exactly believe what's going on right now and is kind of in a state of shock, so she won't really pay attention to Kraven saying that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. He tells MJ to run, but she is stopped in her tracks by Kraven. Kraven takes her away and tells him to follow or she will die along with a bunch of other people. Peter is pissed. At first he thinks that his identity has got out and that's why Kraven knows who he is. Of course he is wrong, but many possibilities are running through his head right now. But Peter knows. He puts down the mask and decides this is it. He has to end this. Spider-Man swings into action. Finally, the epic Amazing Spider-Man score is fueling the scene in the background as he chases Kraven down. But then he's stopped. He's stopped by military forces. Spider-Man is surrounded and it's General Thunderbolt Ross. He says that Spider-Man must hand himself over to the government and that he is breaking Federation laws. Spider-Man is shouting at them and the real problem is getting away with the hostages. He takes out a few of the soldiers, but then Iron Man lands in and shouts that that is enough. Iron Man looks at him and says he needs to stop. Spider-Man explains the situation to Tony. And what's good about this is that Spider-Man tried to do the exact same thing in Civil War and tried to explain the bigger picture to Tony, but he wouldn't listen. Spider-Man uses this as an example, obviously, as Tony knows what was going on in Siberia now after the events of Civil War. And Tony comes full circle. Tony completes his small little character arc set up by Civil War into this movie. He has learned that you have to break the rules to sometimes do the right thing, and this time, Tony has learned, and he knows that now, this is taking down Kraven. Tony agrees and Iron Man distracts the military soldiers as Spider-Man swings away. These two are now friends. The score kicks in again and Spider-Man tracks Kraven to a building with 5 hostages and MJ being one of them. Dimitri then reveals himself saying that he has a little surprise for Spider-Man, and it's all revealed to Spider-Man that he is the one behind all of this. Kraven and his escape from jail, MJ's kidnapping, everything. Kraven exclaims that he's just a reckless, scared kid. Peter knows this is his judgment day. He knows he can't mess up this time. Kraven and Spider-Man fight in the building. Kraven is trying to keep him as distracted as possible before the bomb blows up. Spider-Man doesn't know this at this point though. Spider-Man and Kraven brawl, and this time Spider-Man has had enough, but the fight is tough, and in the midst of it, Peter gets his mask ripped off of him, and MJ sees it's Peter behind the mask. Peter beats Kraven and starts to get the civilians out of there. He drops MJ to the ground and says that he'll explain later. She is shocked and in disbelief that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. However, Peter still has to deal with Dimitri. He goes back inside and Dimitri is standing there saying he is too late. Peter asks what he means by that, and then Dimitri jumps out of the window and the bomb blows up with Peter inside. As far as Dimitri knows, he has won. He won. He beat Spider-Man, but it doesn't kill him because he's Spider-Man and he has spider powers, but it severely injures him. And that is it. Dimitri escapes, and Spider-Man won, but also lost. There is something to learn here, and this also does ground Spider-Man's character. It doesn't make him overly powerful, it doesn't make him as powerful or OP as the Avengers. This really does show us that Spider-Man really is only the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and he still has a lot to learn in comparison to our fellow Avengers. We then get a scene at the end of the movie once Kraven is in jail and all is said and done, with Tony and Spider-Man. Spider-Man has saved the day, saved the civilians, he'd won back the trust of the city, but he's still reckless, and the building was still blown up. This is like the Civil War scene where Captain America and Scarlet Witch accidentally blow up the building, and then obviously causing the Registration Act. But instead, no one died this time. It's a step in the right direction. Tony says that he sees something in Spider-Man, and he doesn't want to stop him because he can really see him becoming the best out of all the Avengers one day. But he must be more careful. Spider-Man breaks down to Tony and takes off his mask, and he reveals that he's Peter Parker. Tony sympathizes with him as he's only a kid. This then sets up his arc for the next movies to come, and also sets up this relationship with Tony Stark, which I thought was lacking in the Civil War story. Spider-Man not only has now a relationship with Tony Stark, just like in the real MCU, but also has one with Captain America as well, really making Spider-Man the middle ground. We then get a scene with Dimitri and the Gentleman from The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2. He explains that he failed him, but he has other plans to bring down Spider-Man once and for all, and explains that something more sinister is coming. And that is the end of part 2 of What If Andrew Was in the MCU. Hopefully you all enjoyed. Part 3 is likely to be the last part where I explain the Sinister Six and then Infinity War and Endgame. However, I see myself increasingly going into more detail about the characters and the developments and the storylines, so it could wound up being 4 parts. However, I'll just see where it takes me and I'll make as many parts as necessary for the story to work. With that being said, thanks for watching and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Peace.